go to cogitate on the different speeches that were given and the thoughts that were planted in your mind, but nonetheless you chose to spend some time with us. So hopefully we are going to make it worth your while. Let me introduce the members of this panel, starting from my extreme left and coming closer. The person who is sitting at the extreme left, I'm sure you know, and I'm not trying to confuse you. Our Secretary General will read a brief statement that was sent to her from Mr. Larry Romani, the Chief Executive Officer of KNOC Inc., who was scheduled to be on this panel, but has indicated that he is not able to make it. I believe that there will be a more fulsome indication of what KNOC is and why it was important for us to invite them when SG Gill presents. To her right is a gentleman whom I think many of you have heard the name, but not necessarily place the face to. Mr. Muirhead from the West Indies Cricket Board is one of those persons who right now feels very much like many of us. He traveled from St. Kitts to Suriname and has experienced the joys of traveling within the region. He is Jamaican by birth only. He now represents the West Indies in his duties, and so he is a full Caribbean man. And as Chief Executive Officer of the West Indies Cricket Board, we will hear from him later on. To my immediate left is Mr. Bernard Panton. Bernard is the General Manager of DirecTV Caribbean and has a lot of background that we could talk about, and I'll actually decide if just before he presents I will go into details of that. Those of you who know me know that I like to talk about the stuff that people don't want us to talk about, and so Bernard would provide tremendous fodder for that. I'll only start by saying that I was in Suriname the last time he was in Suriname, and that was back in 1997. If you notice him when he leaves here, he's walking with a little bit of a limp, and I know how he got it in Suriname, and he thought he was enjoying himself. And just to say that the rest of us were wondering what the hell he was trying to do. If he wishes to tell you the details of what is not a sporting injury that causes him to be lumbering around with what looks like a wooden knee implanted by somebody who is trying to fix back something that was dislocated, he can give you the details on that. If he does not give you the details, then if you are really media people, you would want to know the details, and I have the scoop. So you can see me privately afterwards, and we will settle the terms of engagement on the dissemination of that information. So our topic this morning, sports rights, and it asks the question, entitlement or responsibility. And it's something that we have engaged with from time to time. And before I ask Sonia to give us the statement that has come from Mr. Romani, let's get on the same page in terms of some of the information that I will share with you. And when we talk about sports rights, I want to frame it in a particular context to make sure that we are having the same discussion. So when we speak of sports rights, we are actually talking about the intellectual property rights to sporting events. And it's those rights that are exploited by their owners. And largely, they do so through various means, and we are here concerned with the primary area that they have used in exploitation of these rights, that is through broadcasters and through digital media operators and consumers. Some of the well-known properties that we have engaged with as broadcasters have been the rights to the Olympic Games, and the Winter Olympics is not one that comes readily to mind, but whenever the Jamaicans put together a bobsled team, it seems to take on tremendous significance in Jamaica that we seek to acquire these rights. The Summer Olympics, however, that is the one that we pay a lot more attention to, because that's where we have had excellence from the days when we were colonies together in the British West Indies participating at the Olympic Games. And today we have a rich tradition of many persons participating in the Olympics from many different territories. On our minds at this point would have to be World Cup football. So the FIFA World Cup football is arguably the most expensive of the broadcast rights that is presented within the Caribbean and is subscribed to within the Caribbean. ICC cricket is one that we have had an interesting journey with. There were times when we felt that ICC cricket rights were a must for the region. And these days, I believe that the rights holders have come knocking on our doors, and we kind of pull the curtain, people outside see that it's them, and go back to doing what we were doing because it's not the flavor of the day anymore. But that's one of the important rights that we have bought as broadcasters and sought to exploit. The Carifta Games is one that has had significant and growing interest. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but it is something that certainly for 4 or 5 of our countries we pay a lot of attention to. We're just coming out of the Caribbean Premier League's CPL T20 cricket, and that is one that this year the numbers on it staggered me a little bit, because I had not seen cricket attempt to command those kinds of rights fees in a very long time in the region. And there are those who spend a fortune securing the rights to things like the Barclays Premier League. And those are exploited in the market. Now, there are some sports rights that are included in what we are talking about. And again, just so that we are on the same page, these are some of them, not all. I remember one of the, and it's not even so recent, it probably would be about 8 years ago, one of the contracts I was involved with had 15 different broadcast rights that were denoted in the contract. So there are so many of them. But some of those that we have to engage with are live radio rights, live and delayed television rights, and here now we talk about free-to-air television, but we also talk about cable rights as distinct, mobile television rights, IPTV rights. There are also catch-up TV rights that are now a part of the internet space, and also what we do on websites, even in traditional media. Big screen rights. There are closed circuit rights that are still exploited. DVD and other recording media rights that are associated with some of the things we do. And there are now social media rights that are being attached to some of the products. These are the main ones that, as broadcasters, we interface with. But as I said, there are many others. So for purposes of our discussion, these are among the major topics that we talk about. Now, we have had the experience across the region of seeing how some entities have been made and how some entities have been broken by the whole rights selling mechanism. We have seen where NBC and NBC Sports here has made tremendous amounts of money out of sports rights, and in particular the Olympics rights. When they do multi-rights agreements, they are doing agreements 10 billion US dollars for 3 Olympic Games, and they make back the money. International Media Content, IMC, the owners of Sportsmax, we have seen them come to the region as a relatively new player, but they have made their name in terms of buying and selling rights. Many of us remember IMG TWI. At some point, they had the rights to market the West Indies cricket within and outside the region, with the within the region component being an interface with the Caribbean Broadcasting Union / the Caribbean Media Corporation, etc., etc. We have seen some entities that have been broken by it. I don't know how many people remember Kirsch Media, a German company, that bought the Olympics rights and then couldn't sell it after they bought it for such a high figure, and the company actually collapsed before the World Cup was held. I think that was in 2002. And then another company, ICL Television, also bought those rights, took over those rights, and ICL Television also went under because of the price that was paid and the fact that they couldn't unsell it to recover from what they paid. And many of us remember CSTN, which was a Trinidad-based Caribbean network. Some of us took them to court for the money that we paid for the rights to World Cup in 2006, and they were not able to deliver. We won in court, but we have never been able to collect a cent. So we have these wonderful judgments that we hold up as victories that are worth nothing. But we have seen the company not re-emerge since then. So some companies have been made and some have been broken in the sports rights issue. And what exactly is a part of how we establish this intellectual property? At the center is an event, a big event. So the CPL would be the event, or the Olympics would be the event. Then you have the production of the event, which is at tremendous cost that is done. And you can have a football match on the field, but if nobody produces it for media consumption, it's just on the field. It doesn't go anywhere else. Then you have the local distribution cost. So you have to move it from the venue to a location where it can be distributed to the rest of the world. So there are the ground charges, whether they are fiber charges, microwave charges, some of them are actually satellite charges that are established. Then you have the satellite distribution charges, which moves it from the location to the rest of the world. So the ground segment moves it from the event location to another point where it then goes to the rest of the world. And then it comes via satellite or via fiber to us as broadcasters. And the broadcasters then make it available across our networks to our consumers. And there is in the midst of that all the thing about whether you're doing it as a paid product or you're doing it as free to air, whether it's live or it's delayed, whether it's catch up or it's through social media and so on. So that really is what the process is. It is the person who has established an event that they own the intellectual property rights for, and the add-on of production cost to that, the add-on of local distribution to that, the add-on of international distribution, the add-on of what then comes to the broadcaster, and then from the broadcaster out. So that's a process that you have, and when you cost all that, you get a raft of costs. Now, local broadcasters have some direct costs that they very often don't talk about, and so people believe that you really just get this process going, and it doesn't involve money. There's a rights fee that one has to pay. There's a contribution to the production cost that is sometimes implicit in the rights fee. There's a contribution to the backhaul cost, that's a local segment of the transportation. You have to promote the event, so your airtime for promotion and so on. That's a cost to the broadcaster. There is the airtime for the event that has to be shown. So if you are going to show 42 football matches in a month on your television station, and you're running roughly 2 hours per match, you're talking about 90 hours of prime time airtime that you are giving up to this event, and it has a cost. The cost of your staff, the cost of the electricity that you use, the cost of the cameras and the analysts and all of that, the airtime costs associated with it. And then there's the opportunity cost, which many rights holders don't believe we have. Many rights holders believe that if you get a product, if you didn't have it, you would be the poorer. But very often, what we do not include in our cost is the programming that you take off the air for the period that you're going to put on this football or cricket. And that sometimes has sponsorship associated with it that you will never get that revenue again. So some of it you can reschedule, but some of it you actually lose entirely. So the opportunity cost is that as broadcasters, we actually give up airtime, earnings for other products that we have on the platform. And so that has to be a part of how you cost it. And then you have to look at what happens to your market, because there is a net cash outflow very often that exists. To cover points 1 to 3, that is the rights fee, the contribution to the production, and the backhaul. You then go and spend $1 million to buy this product in rights, and you take that money, and whoever you pay it to is going to the rights holder who lives somewhere outside of your country. And so there's a net outflow from your market of monies that, yes, it is spent with the media, but the money has left your shores and gone somewhere else. So it didn't go to growing the pie, didn't go towards helping in any way there. So very quickly, we have to interrogate the issue of whether it's an entitlement. When you look at all of those components, is it an entitlement? Is the consumer entitled at whatever cost it is to have access to these things? Some people believe that if there is an event and if there is consumer interest, that in the world where we live today, the consumer must have it. And somebody else must worry about how you pay for it, but the consumer, because they now know of it through social media, they must have it. They are entitled to have it because there is public interest in it. The question is, public interest at what cost? And who pays that cost? Is the free-to-air service to pay for it, especially if you're a commercial free-to-air station? Do you pay for it and then go and tell your shareholders, well, I really don't have any profit that I can pay you a dividend because I use the money to pay for football so that people could watch it? Or do you run it at a loss? And when you run it at a loss and the equipment breaks down, how do you repair it if you don't have a business model that can sustain it? Is the consumer entitled to access the things that they are interested in if it is reachable on a satellite, but it is not intended for your market? So if you can use your cousin's address in New Orleans to buy a black box, and you can put up a satellite dish that can access the signal as it is passing over Jamaica, intended for Puerto Rico, can you take it down and use it without the intellectual property rights of somebody else being addressed? Are you any better than the person who has opened the chicken coop and taken out a chicken because you didn't put a padlock on it and has gone with your chicken, and therefore, because they have access, they must have it, and you can't do anything about it? That's something that you have to look at in the context of your jurisdiction and of intellectual property rights. In some areas, for free-to-air services, which dominate what we do here, is it a question of free-to-air versus paid? Is it that, well, this has so much public interest that you should not charge people for it? You should find a way to give it to them free. There are some people who sometimes call our organization and they say, well, I don't worry about how you're going to pay for it. You're the manager. You must worry about that. You're going to figure that out. But it's not right for us to have to pay to see this thing. And the other day I had one of those calls about the Commonwealth Games, and someone was pointing out to me, we have a badminton team that is there, and we want to see the team play badminton. And I said, sir, I'm quite willing to get that for you. It's $900 per hour for the satellite time. And if you're willing to give me the amount of money to pay for the satellite time for those matches, I will go and book it. No, you need to find a way. So the question is, when it comes to free to air, do we just need to find a way magically, if that's the case, so that people can have this access? Or do we actually put it on a paid service? And if they're really interested, then they talk with their pockets. They go and put their money where their mouth is. In terms of the entitlement, is it reasonable for rights holders to sell the rights to some things with minimum broadcast participation in the discussions about the conditionalities that they are giving you, in spite of the financial implications? So, again, let's use our Commonwealth Games example that I just mentioned. The Commonwealth Games rights holders said, well, nobody really seems interested for the Caribbean. Jamaica seems to want it. I'll sell it to you, but you have to guarantee me that you will get it shown on 11 other Caribbean countries' stations. Now, is that reasonable? I operate a national service in Jamaica. I want to buy it for Jamaica. And you're telling me, well, the only way I can buy it, I'm going to marry it to 11 other Caribbean countries. And you must deliver a dozen when I only have services in one. So those are some of the issues that say, well, is there this entitlement that you have to address both from the consumer and from the rights holder's standpoint? Is the rights holder entitled to commit advertising exposure in their commercial arrangements with their sponsors? So in the region, we have a situation where, from the West Indies Cricket Board to IMC, KNOC, well, to be fair, IMC not so much, because I don't think I've seen IMC actually come with central advertising. But there are models that are built where they say to their title sponsors, well, we will give you 2 ads per hour in the cricket. Without any discussion with me as a broadcaster, no, they're giving away my inventory. They're making decisions on things that my board hold me accountable for. But they give it away. And then they come and they say, well, you can have the rights to this, and people are entitled to see this on free to air. But I've made an arrangement where you must show these commercials in it. Now, is that a fair situation to deal with? And so we have the responsibilities that go with it. And I'm going to wind up now because we need to hear from the presenters. So there are some issues about subsidized commercial broadcasts or broadcasting options that we need to look at. If somebody is to provide the subsidy, who is it? Because as a commercial entity, I get told that I must make my business work. And when I'm trying to do the things that make my business work, they say, you're mercenary. You're just a big capitalist who looking to make money off everything. And I'm saying, well, how do I pay for it? If you have another model, then let's see. So where's the responsibility on that? Whose responsibility is it to educate the public that they can go into the supermarket and they can go into the petrol station, but they can't tell the people put in free gas or give me a pound of rice and walk out with it free? And that my gas, my rice, is my airtime. So in the same way that you know that you cannot walk out of the supermarket without paying for the product that you went for, you can't walk out of my shop, which is what you're seeing on your screen, and decide that, well, I have no responsibility to address how you get compensated for what I am consuming. There are some things about where are we now that the West Indies Cricket Board can address us on. and some of the issues that we have about the Olympics. We were hoping to hear from Mr. Romani on that. We have seen an announcement that 2016 is going to be one of the most fabulous circumstances that we will have in the region. Many of us as broadcasters have heard that our stations are going to be doing wonderful things that we know nothing about. So we need to actually now interrogate some of these issues as to where are we now and how we are going to move from there. So broadcast rights bidding wars have been a feature of driving up the price, because we as broadcasters feel that there are some things that we must have, but we don't realize that we're pushing it out of our own reach in the way we approach it. There are some key rights that we don't even have access to. I mean, I don't know what the status of the 10 cricket arrangements are with the West Indies Cricket Board, but there were rights to cricket played in the region that we didn't have the option to show on television in the region. And there were rights to cricket played in different territories, including in Jamaica, where I could watch it commercial free on cable. But if my station wanted to show it, we had to get permission to show it only if the grounds was full. And we would have to show it with the commercial at that time. So again, there are key issues for broadcasters there. What's the business model is a big question. And then there's a question of advertising inventory that I raised earlier, and the intellectual property rights breaches that take place by cable operators. Now, that's a big one that I could go on and on about. But there are huge breaches that take place in terms of you buy something, the rights of something, and you have to be running around like a police. Watching, in the case of Jamaica, we have 42 cable operators. So you have to be getting people to watch 42 cable stations to see if anybody taking your meat and rice, which is what it is that we're out there trying to do. So the question is, how do we address those things? Well, the people who will answer all of the things and, and make this all clear, where I have failed to do any kind of justice with it, are the people who are here. I'm going to change up the order a little bit. I'm going to ask S.G. Gill to read what was sent to her from KNOC Inc. Then we are going to hear from Mr. Michael Muirhead, the the Chief Executive Officer of the West Indies Cricket Board. And then we'll hear from Bernard Pantin. In Jamaica, we could call him Woodenfoot Bernard, right? We will hear from Bernard Pantin, the Chief.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning again. I would just like to say we've had 2 apologies for this session. You would have seen in your program booklets that we had actually confirmed that IMC, Sportsmax, would have been represented today. Unfortunately, Ollie McIntosh sincere apologies. We were even trying to see if he could join us virtually, but that was not possible at the last minute. I read to you now a statement on behalf of Mr. Larry Roman, presenting at the CBU's Forum on Sports Rights. However, circumstances beyond my control have prevented me from traveling this week. I apologize and wish all at the conference every success. Six national Olympic committees across the Caribbean to purchase, monetize, and manage the broadcast rights for Olympic television and other Olympic for Caribbean National Olympic Committees through the acquisition and sale of broadcast rights for sporting events during the Olympics.
In our conference, it will be one of the things that we will note and decide on how we will seek to engage thereafter. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear now from the Chief Executive Officer of the West Indies Cricket Board, Mr. Michael Muirhead. So at this point, we will begin to have a flow of answers to the many questions that have been raised today.
Thank you, Gary. I'm not sure if you want me to stay here or do you need me at the podium? It doesn't matter?
It's up to you.
Okay. It seems very informal here, and I think that's a forum that we should really be in at this point, since I don't want to be attacked from all sides standing. I want some others to take some of those blows. So Gary Allen, moderator, and CBU Vice President, Mr. Bernard Pantin, who is my co-panelist and GM for Direct TV Caribbean, Sonia Gill, Secretary General of the CBU. Let me recognize Sheila Bolai, who is the President of the CBU. CBU delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You know, I was listening to Gary talk about the various sports and what he had indicated as taking up of his broadcast obligation, and I noticed cricket came 4th and 6th on his list. I don't know if that's an indication of the priority which he has placed on cricket, but yeah, friendly middle order batting. Must have a good journalist, yes. But I hope there will be some clarity at the end of this all to define, you know, the criteria which stipulates the order in which you as broadcasters place on the various options available to you in terms of the broadcasting landscape. I wish to convey my own sincere gratitude, along with that of the West Indies Cricket Board at your gracious invitation to join you at this marquee event of the Caribbean Broadcasting Union. At a previous such event, which was held in Antigua, which actually is the headquarters for the West Indies Cricket Board, it occurred to us then, given the synergies which exist between West Indies cricket and Caribbean broadcasting, that there should be a more collaborative involvement between the two sectors. Yes, Gary, we recognize that you are a partner in this. As you know, some years ago, the West Indies Cricket Board recognized the critical importance of media in the business of cricket and offered an invitation to have the media fraternity be represented as a special member of the board. We are pleased that the invitation was accepted and representation at each opportunity since has been dutiful. I am particularly pleased to not only join you for this meeting, but to be given the opportunity to present to you. I intend to use the time to share with you our vision for cricket, our strategic goals and objectives, our challenges and concerns, and importantly, to listen to your views on the way we manage and develop the game, along with how you can assist us through strategic and mutually beneficial partnerships. The West Indies Cricket Board's mission is to manage, develop, and promote cricket to the benefit and enjoyment of the West Indian people and the world. Our mission is to provide successful and entertaining West Indies teams whilst adhering to sporting ideals, to establish cricket as the sport of choice and a viable career option, to establish the WICB as an efficient and effective governing body, and to establish the WICB as a viable organization. Our strategic objectives include producing winning West Indies teams. This is both men and women in all three formats of the game. Professionalizing first-class cricket. Ensuring financial sustainability. Growing the sport at the grassroots level. Expanding in the North American market, and producing world-class players in every format of the game. Quite a formidable list of objectives. Well, I come to you here in Suriname, having just witnessed the final of the Caribbean Premier League in St. Kitts. I believe we can agree that the tournament has, since its inception last year, given a fillip to West Indies cricket. We have seen consistently large crowds, and the interest which had always simmered just below the surface has now bubbled over. West Indies cricket, as it stands now, may not be as strong a force as it once was. The palpable interest in the games and the team, which we once knew, has admittedly dissipated somewhat. We have had bouts of resurgence. In 2003, we effected the largest fourth innings run chase to defeat the then mighty Australia at the famed Antigua Recreation Ground. Earlier in that series, Shivnarayan Chandrapal scored the third fastest century in Test cricket. The following year, at the very same venue, our champion batsman Brian Lara reclaimed his world record for the most runs in a Test inning. A few months later, the team won the ICC Champions Trophy in dramatic fashion. And in 2006, the team reached a final of another ICC Champion Trophy. In 2007, we hosted the ICC Cricket World Cup. Between 2006 and 2008, we had the intervention of Stanford 2020 tournament, which allowed for a greater level of professionalism in the sport. In 2010, we hosted the third edition of the ICC World T20. And in 2012, the team lifted the fourth edition of the ICC World 2020. To see the West Indies team lift the trophy and dance in joyous celebration brought pride and honor to the region and evoked memories of 1975 and 1979 and our years of domination of Test cricket in the 80s and early 90s. In recent years, there has been positive movement on the ICC rankings for Test cricket, but this has been hampered by inconsistency. Meanwhile, in women's cricket, the West Indies women's team continue to climb and be a major force to be reckoned with. Our development programs in youth cricket and at the senior levels continue to be expanded and refined. I am proud to report that we now have more development tournaments and camps than ever before. We also now have more legends of the game, imparting their knowledge and expertise than ever before. What we are most excited about at this stage, though, is the move to truly professionalize West Indies first-class cricket. The West Indies Cricket Board is about to conclude arrangements to launch 6 professional cricket franchises throughout the Caribbean, with one being based in each of our 6 territories. These franchises will have a squad of players who will train on a day-to-day basis. They will practice, eat, breathe, and sleep cricket 24/7. They will have the services of the best coaches and some of the legends of our game. They will work on developing and refining their skills in every facet of the game. They will do community and coaching work to help build the game at the grassroots level. Most importantly, they will, we envision, lift the standard of regional first-class cricket, which in turn will heighten the quality of cricket our players execute on the international stage when they don West Indies colors. The process will have a knock-on effect. While the CPL will continue to hold its place of pride in regional cricket and excite fans, the professional franchises is where these players who play for the West Indies in the CPL and in our first-class tournaments, there they will be drilled, groomed, and honed into entertaining, high-quality performers we all agree they are capable of. Specifically, with regard to regional first-class cricket, we see emerging opportunities for partnerships with the media fraternity, particularly radio and television production and broadcasting. Before I delve into specific areas, it may be worthwhile to refresh your memories on how live television broadcast of cricket came into being. Indeed, some of you in this room would have been involved with the process from the very conception. Live television broadcasts of cricket in the region commenced in 1989 with TWI and has continued annually since. Through knowledge sharing, there has been massive development of skills and capacity, particularly in the areas of camera operation and audio engineering, to a point where several of these professionals who were trained during international broadcasts in the region now routinely provide their services around the globe, including the Indian Premier League. The initiation of this process owes a debt of gratitude to former CBU Secretary General, the recently passed Terence Ormond Holder of Guyana. He and his team at CBU were instrumental in producing the first television broadcast of cricket from the region and insisting on international standards such that there would be no hesitation by global broadcasters in acquiring and distributing the product. We are proud that today, West Indies cricket affords the region several hundred hours annually of live exposure of international television. This continues to be unparalleled in terms of direct promotion of the region. In each broadcast, there is a built-in package of promotion of the destination in which the broadcasters are broadcasting from. This is at no cost to the country, the taxpayers, or the fans. There is some perpetuated misinformation about television and radio broadcast rights with regard to cricket. I will share some facts with you so as to help to allow for a clearer understanding. The West Indies Cricket Board owns the television and radio broadcast rights when the West Indies team plays in the Caribbean. Currently, the television rights for all international cricket in the region has been sold to Taj TV until 2019. The radio broadcast rights are also sold to Taj TV until 2015. Let me pause immediately to provide some background and explanation, as I know many of your minds have already asked, why Taj TV? Why not CMC or Sportsmax? The answer is a very simple one. The most significant revenue stream for the West Indies Cricket Board is media rights. That is the rights for television broadcast specifically. What the international television companies offer the WICB for these broadcast rights cannot be compared to the best offers that regional television entities can put on the table. This is not a fault of regional television companies. It simply represents the disparities in the global marketplace. It is one of the realities which we contend. The WICB simply cannot afford to ignore the offers from the international television companies. What we have been insistent on, though, is that these contracts carve out that the production must be provided to regional stations so that West Indies cricket can be shown to all West Indian people throughout the region. Regrettably, despite best efforts, a similar arrangement could not be achieved for radio. Taj TV has sold rights for the Caribbean to TBC of Trinidad and Tobago. The West Indies Cricket Board, on average, through the live production of international cricket in the region, showcases our region for approximately 280 hours each year. And for those of you in television who prefer to measure these things by minutes, that would be a mammoth 16,800 minutes annually. And that is to reach a global audience with certain showings in India and other Asian countries, England, United States of America, Canada, and depending on the opposition in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, Scotland, and further afield. I need not point out the obvious correlation and benefit to the tourism sector. Safe to say that next year when England visits the region for 3 test matches in Antigua, Grenada, and Barbados, we expect in excess of 15,000 visiting fans coming to the region. And if we use the common factor of, say, $1,500 US per tourist, it's about $100 a day for 2 weeks. We are speaking of a direct injection of over $22.5 million US in the regional economies. Admittedly, the majority of that going to most of it going to the 3 host territories. This, in and of itself, is beyond economic measure in terms of the exposure the regions and the individual countries receive. Still, there are numerous opportunities which still exist for further exposure by carving out areas for targeted, subtle marketing and promotions. The other popular misnomer is that WICB owns the broadcast rights for when the West Indies team plays outside of the region. It does not. These rights are held by the hosts of those series, and in the case of the World Cup and World T20, it is the ICC, the International Cricket Council, who owns these broadcast rights. The West Indies Cricket Board is extremely proud of being able to carve out an arrangement which provides the television production for the region. The intention is to ensure that this happens with the radio broadcast rights in the future. But there can be no guarantees, as the process will be difficult and complex. The WICB is aware of CBU and member station concerns about the cost of rights for international cricket and for the World Cup and World T20. We continue to make representation to our parent body, the International Cricket Council, on these matters, but with the global economic landscape skewed as it is, the perennial challenge we face in terms of global negotiations, as experienced by WHO and EPA, does not allow for significant negotiating leverage. Now, while the rights of international cricket in the region is settled until 2019, in addition to opportunities for promotion, partnership, knowledge transfer, there are significant opportunities available for discussion in regional cricket. The Nagico Super 50 tournament, regional first class cricket, West Indies women's cricket, under 19, under 17, and under 15 all present opportunities. By way of example, we are pleased to report that we have begun to partner with local stations on a model for the broadcast for regional cricket, which we are excited about and which we believe offers opportunities to further enhance skills and broaden the cricket product on television. This partnership was initiated with Winners TV in St. Lucia, where they met the production cost and received rights to broadcast within St. Lucia, and the WICB retained rights to broadcast beyond the St. Lucia. We look forward to establishing similar arrangements with CBU member stations in each country. We look forward to better understanding CBU and member stations' challenges, skepticisms, fears, and reservations. We manage a product which offers incredible opportunities for partnership and mutual benefit. WICB is heavily reliant on television and radio for the expansion and resuscitation of the sport. In today's world, professional sport must have television coverage, and especially live television coverage as a critical component. West Indies cricket does not operate in a vacuum. We obviously cannot afford to. If we took that approach, cricket would die a natural death. We must partner with television and the wider media for success. It is a hand-and-glove relationship, and we have to work together to ensure a proper fit. I wish to leave you with our most exciting venture for regional television since the introduction of live television broadcast, which was in 1989. That is the introduction of the professional first-class cricket system. In addition to what I previously outlined in terms of how the system will function and what is hoped it will achieve and engender, it is also the intention to have the matches broadcast live on television so that regional and diaspora audiences can view these contests live. We believe that in this specific area, there are opportunities for us to collaborate both on television and radio to our mutual benefit. For the WICB, the live broadcast of regional cricket around the region and bringing it to the homes of fans, and for CBU members, quality content and a dedicated annual revenue stream. On this positive note, I conclude, and I look forward to your questions and the discussions to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muirhead. Before we get a raft of questions and comments coming forward, let me hurry on to introduce the next speaker and ask you to hold your questions until the end of Bernard's presentation. Now, as I mentioned before, there is the informal introduction of Bernard. You see the limp? there's the informal introduction of Bernard, and there's also you notice the SG has a far more suave and debonair presentation. So she has given me specific notes to keep me in order about who Bernard really is. He has been involved in the broadcasting industry for more than 38 years. So that's why people think there's child labor rampant in the Caribbean. He started as a sports reporter in Trinidad and Tobago at TTT, that's Trinidad and Tobago Television, in 1976, and served the company in the capacity of an on-air presenter, a sports commentator, and a producer. He went on to graduate from Syracuse University in 1985 in radio and television management, and returned to TTT as the programs manager in 1987 after serving as an advisor to Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson for 1 year. And you recall that because of the advice he would have given, Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson went on to become president of that country. So that's Bernard's doing. He left TTT to become the founding station manager at CCN TV6 in 1991 and remained with the company until 1997 before becoming general manager of DirecTV Caribbean. Bernard has served as vice president television for the Caribbean Broadcasting Union and also sat on 3 government committees, including the one which drafted the white paper leading to the formulation of what is today the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. I need to ask the people from Trinidad if this is a good thing, because it's stated as a positive, but I don't know. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bernard Pantin.
Good morning. Let me just make sure this is working. Yes, it is. We are going to have some fun this morning. I think Gary set the stage without any prompting for this. So let me make it clear that I'm standing to demystify Gary's story. But on reflection this morning, I have to tell you, I was very excited to be back in Suriname. The last time I was in Suriname, and Gary reminded me last night, we were having dinner together, was in fact for the last CBU meeting, which was in 1997. It was also my last CBU meeting, which might lead one to think that some of the incidents to which Gary may be referring led to my ouster from the CBU. That is not true. I want to thank Shida Bolai for the invitation. A lot of memories came flooding back to me, not only of Suriname, but of the CBU in general. And it is quite amazing to think that it's 17 years since I have been involved in a meeting like this, and many of you I know, many of you are younger, and therefore I'm meeting some of you for the first time. And sometimes I would like to think that time has stood still, but it has not. Though there are times that you have to reflect and think that the more the things change, the more that some of them remain the same. So 1997, there was no internet, no Facebook, and a number of other things like that. But I'm going to take you a little further back very quickly to set the stage for the discussion. And in fact, I think this is going to turn out to be a wonderful discussion, both in terms of the presentations we've had from the West Indies Cricket Board, the sense of where we are with the Olympics, Gary's own involvement in this field, because he has sat on several sides of the coin. There's been a very interesting time over the last 30 plus years for CBU television. So I'm going to go through very quickly a couple of historical anecdotes, which I think are interesting, because I think it actually brings us to where we are today with the Olympics. I'll talk a little bit about West Indies cricket and add some dimension to some of the things that Michael spoke about, and maybe add to the historical record. World Cup football, which is always a big thing for us in the region. I call this the players. I mean, we're talking about sports, so I guess you have to have players, and the players are really CBU and the member stations, and then all the other players we talk about. And then the Olympics, because I think we are at a very critical juncture for the CBU as far as the Olympics are concerned and the future for the CBU in this context. So the environment of the 1970s and 80s, I mean, it was the first 10 years of the CBU. The CBU had started in 1970. It was driven a lot by radio then, and we really have to thank the pioneers of the CBU for the great work that they've done over the years, and some of them, are still very involved, well, are still around. Farouk Mohammed comes back to Trinidad every now and again, and he lives in Canada. He was one of those there at the start. From a television point of view, in the 70s, the world was significantly different. There were only single TV stations in the main markets. TTT no longer exists, although it's reincarnated in the form of CNMG. JBC is now technically TVJ, but not owned by the government anymore. And therefore, TV stations in many respects were entitled by default to have the access to sports events. There was nowhere else to go. A message I hope will be properly communicated to those who wish to peddle Olympics rights, but we'll talk about that later. And therefore, the 70s was a sense of responsibility. Those of us in the broadcasting field in those years, we had a responsibility to bring these events to people. Money was not the big issue at the time because we belonged to government organizations, although in the case of TTT and JBC, we were we were independently run, except when chairmen of boards got involved, and they didn't tend to get too involved in sport. They tended more to want to get involved in the news. We sold our own advertising, we generated our own revenue, and we actually turned a profit. But it was easy because it was a monopoly. There were exciting times, late 70s, 1980s. World Championship boxing was a real good example of both entitlement and the need for dynamic negotiation. So, you had Leonard Duran and Hearns, Ali Fraser, Foreman, and Holmes. And you would have to pay potentially as much as $20,000 US for rights, which I know many of you would even balk at now to buy a 3-hour program for $20,000. But we were the only game in town, they were the only game in town, and we had some really exciting moments. I can't take credit for Don King's hair standing up, but when he calls and says, I'm going to sell you for $20,000 US, and you're the only game in town, you play a game of bluff and chicken until somebody blinks. You want it because as Gary would say, your viewers want it. So you play a game of bluff, and unfortunately, the game of bluff sometimes goes down to the last minute, which is not good for the broadcaster because you don't know what you'll get in terms of advertising. But in those days, we used to get $500 US for a 30-second spot. There are some programs today, including many sporting events, that I know many of you broadcasters in Trinidad and Jamaica would kill to get $500 US for a 30-second spot. But that's what it was, and that was 30 years ago in the early 1980s. Those were fun negotiations. Then we come to the history of West Indies cricket. Just a minor correction. Live coverage of Test cricket actually took place in the 1970s, as far back as that in Trinidad. I'm not sure the details as far as Jamaica would be concerned. Richard Purcell, who wants to look a little younger than me, would remember doing that kind of coverage and those kinds of broadcasts. And in those days, there was no videotape. So a lot of the live coverage was, yes, purely live coverage, and it wasn't as good as it is today, but we kind of did it, and the West Indies Cricket Board and the local cricket boards had some restrictions. You could do the first half hour, the first hour, and the last half hour, and in between, you do some of that. And then it kind of died down a little bit. I'm pleased to have been lucky to be associated with some of the key events in West Indies cricket coverage. So in the evening moments when we are having a drink, I'd be happy to give you more details on some of these stories. But I'm sure some of you remember, and it's still actually not owned, I would say, by TWI, but they treat it as if they own it. Some of you might remember that very famous over from Michael Holden to Jeff Boycott in the second innings of a test match at Kensington Oval in 1981. Okay, that was just after videotape had come about. And interregional TV coverage at that time existed in some really simple ways. I convinced my boss to allow me to go to Barbados. I think it was the first time I'd ever been to Barbados, with a 60-minute pneumatic 3/4-inch videotape. And I said, I'm going to go to Barbados, and I'm sure Barbados is recording this test match, and I'll bring back highlights. And we actually convinced an advertising agency to do the coverage of it. So I went with my 3/4-inch pneumatic tape, and I got to the Kensington Oval, and Barbados was covering it, CBC was covering it with one camera, okay, just for news coverage. But we were there, they recorded it, we go back in the night, we dumb off some highlights, and I had something to bring back to Trinidad. No internet. Inter-island travel was still dodgy then. And we covered most of the test match, except that there was a fire in Bridgetown at 5 o'clock one afternoon, and the cameraman had to leave it to go and cover the fire. So there was no coverage of that last hour. Thank God Holden didn't bowl to boycott then. Okay, that happened the next day. And we had that over, came back to Trinidad. That was when they had rest days in Test cricket. Okay, so we put on half-an-hour highlights, and we made tons of money, right, at TTT. So it was a rest day. So I say to my boss, hey, things look good. Should I go back? Go back. So I went back, we got the last 2 days, and the last 2 days was the holding over to boycott. And we brought it back, and we showed another half an hour, and we made 400% or 500% profit on it. And look at what it was. Advertisers were just glad to see something happening in Barbados. One camera. Can you imagine the coverage? So that was the start. And then nothing happened for 8 years. Actually, after that Barbados test match, we went to Antigua for the very first test match played in Antigua. We took more equipment because Barbados was such a success. And we recorded Viv Richards' 100 in Antigua. First time a test match was played in Antigua. Nobody could find that, no, because it actually was erased because TDT was trying to make space and they erased it. But that is how we saw cricket done, unfortunately. Okay? We still have the holding over to boycott, which TWI dubbed off in 1990, and they have it. I'm not sure we have it, but they have it. And you can find it on the internet, so arguably the world has it. 1989 was when it was all kick-started. India came down here, some very enterprising Indian businessmen came down, they wanted to do coverage, they got involved with the CBU, and we facilitated it. That one has some good stories. The boat going to Guyana started drifting for 2 days with a truck and our camera people, and it reached the morning of the test match, but it happened. That led to TWI coming into Trinidad and Tobago, and to Barbados, and into Jamaica, and wanting to do coverage of the England tour. And that was when the CBU was an extremely strong body in terms of standing up for the broadcasters in the region. And Terry Holder, who we lost earlier this year, I recall being at the Kensington Oval with Terry, and we were fighting tooth and nail to make sure that we do not exclude broadcasters from being part of it. And in fact, Michael did mention the question of getting our own staff to be involved. It was a tough negotiation with TWI. They were bringing in all the experts, which we wanted. And we had to settle eventually. It was a big negotiation that we were going to guarantee that at least 6 people from the Caribbean would have been involved in working with TWI for that first tour in 1990. And they did learn a lot. But I know what the objectives of Terry, what Terry's objectives were. And Terry's objectives at that time was that we would take that knowledge and transfer that knowledge back to our stations. And regrettably, that has really not happened. Because I know the boys, well, they're now big men, and they make more money than me. Because yes, they go to the Indian Premier League and they get paid good salaries. Okay? But people like Colin Oliveri and Ryle Stewart and people from throughout the region, they no longer work for us. They don't work for the stations. The stations haven't benefited. They have, and I'm glad for them. But they now work for the the other companies. So that's why I use the word colonialism, because Terry was fighting for that. And 23 years later, 24 years later, has that happened? In those days, West Indies cricket was funded sort of primarily in terms of coverage of West Indies cricket. Trinidad and Jamaica each accounted for 25%. Barbados, 15 to 20%. I always felt a little sorry for Barbados, because despite the size of the population, the CBU made them pay more than their size. But they were a monopoly, and Barbados loves cricket, so they were willing to pay more for it. And the rest of the Caribbean ponied up. And then we've had great examples of, Kelly Broadcasting, the 1999 World Cup. We own the rights. We sub-licensed to them. They made plenty money, and then they took it over from us. And then they now sell it back to us in those days. Since then, Kelly has sold out and became associated with EchoStar and Dish. But in those days, we helped Kelly Broadcasting get rich off cricket. And this is what I call the missed opportunity. I was lucky, if you want to call it that, to be involved in discussions in the 1990s. I remember exactly where we were when we were then. I was invited to have a meeting with Pat Russo, who was then president of the West Indies Cricket Board, and Teddy Griffith. And we discussed the question of opportunity for stations to invest in the future. It came out of that same TWI IMG list. Because we brought TWI here and IMG, gave them all kind of customs concessions, and they rented equipment, and I got a hold of the equipment list, and I realized that we were paying 25%, i.e. the West Indies Cricket Board, because it cost the West Indies Cricket Board, 25% of the value of the equipment to rent the equipment. So Pat, as the West Indies Cricket Board, and ourselves, we sat down and said, hey, we have a chance. Why don't the stations together buy the equipment and rent it back to TWI? We'll make the money back in 4 years. But not only that, when cricket is over, we keep the equipment in the Caribbean and we use it to do other things. But who was going to spend the money? The stations? The West Indies Cricket Board? When the time came to say who should spend the money, everybody kind of like, well, I have no money. So we lost an opportunity, an incredible opportunity, because today, in many respects, we still rent equipment and we still bring in a whole bunch of foreign staff. And I think we have to ask ourselves, can we fix that? Can we address that? Football is another fascinating, wonderful history. From 1982 to 1990, we were still single station markets. These same stations are no longer exist today. So somewhere on record, TDT does have the letter from FIFA to Jack Warner giving him the rights for $1. And we didn't have to pay a lot for it then, but it was a lot in those days, relatively speaking. In 1990, Jack became a player finally in the market in terms of that, and then competition came in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. And CCN TV6 had started in 1991. We felt World Cup was important. We paid a lot of money for World Cup rights. I think the number might have been somewhere in the region of $75,000 US. That was 20 years ago. So earlier I talked about how the advertising value didn't increase, right? So the spot rate for world boxing was $500 US per spot, and today that's what the spot rate is. But the rights went from $75,000 US in 1994. I don't know what the individual stations pay today, but I know the overall numbers, so I have an idea, to between $1.5 and $2 million US for a World Cup. Somebody got rich off it, but not the stations. And we have this recurring theme now that the Olympics are coming up. Then the deal started to extend to Caribbean-wide in 1998, and the rights value went up, and then we had, Gary already mentioned this, shrouded in controversy, CSTN, Selby Brown. Still wrong, eh? Actually, he supposedly still has a network called CSN. Supposedly it streams or whatever, and he's been trying to get it to put it on my platform, but we haven't gone there yet. And then IMC got the rights for 2010 and 2014. But fundamentally, the issue now is that World Cup is now beyond CMC and CBU. Because if in the 1990s we couldn't invest in equipment, and I say we as an outsider, how can you buy rights now when the total cost of rights approach $8, $9, $10 million for the region? So where are we today? I like to think of what Gary calls the business model. I call the broadcast television ecosystem for free-to-air. Yes, we've been impacted by multi-channel video distribution systems. I'm one of them. There is what I call, and some of you might disagree with this, I call it the distraction of the new technologies, live streaming, etc. It's here. I know the kids use it, but I promise you something. In 2018 and in 2020 for the Olympics, 2018 for the World Cup, the majority of people are still going to be watching World Cup and Olympics on broadcast TV. If you want to go off chasing live streaming rights, yeah, they're ancillary. But the more things change, the more that they remain the same. So I would suggest you focus on the core business. We have less government ownership in the ecosystem of broadcast companies. You know, there's been a movement towards stations becoming private. I guess Barbados is the last bastion in terms of government owned, but that day will come. That day will come very soon because the Barbados government does not have money to support a loss-making broadcast system. So we have the changing role of the CBU and member dynamics. So what is the role of the CBU, the CMC, and the members? I'm assuming, actually I was very impressed by all of the presentations this morning at the opening ceremony. And I think you have a really great opportunity at this week's session to move forward on a number of issues, and I think you all have identified the correct priorities. I will not be staying for the event on Friday, because 17 years ago that was one of the reasons. No, I'm not afraid. I know you're going to tell them at some point, so I'm not afraid to tell the story, you know. One needs a little bit of levity. We went into the jungle, and egged on by people like Vic Fernandes and Gary Allen, they wanted someone to go and dance with the group of citizens there. And I still have the shell anklets that I was given to dance. And I'm hoping that Marcia, I think Marcia was there, I'm hoping Marcia will say that I quitted myself well. But it required a lot of squats on your knees and that sort of thing. And, you know, the president of the CBU says, dance, you dance. But there were long-term effects. So for all of you who are going on Friday to the ecotourism and whatever, just be cautious. So where is the CBU, the CMC and its members? First of all, I'm not afraid to use the word tension, because tension is good. So there's the tension between the public interest and the commercial viability. It will always be there. Then there's a tension among the CBU members in the larger territories. I am not going to skirt that fact. And as a result of that, in the discussion with Gary last night, this word came up. He introduced the word the trust deficit, what I call the negative effects of the trust deficit. I was in well, let me just get to the last one and then I'll come back. And because of that trust deficit, the CBU has lost on several counts. The Olympics was the last big product, in my view, that the CBU kind of owned until they lost it to Sportsmax and now eventually to Canok. So the question is, we have a new bogeyman, all right? And Canok might be seen as the bogeyman. And I don't mind discussing it, because whether Larry was here or not, we need to be able to put all the things on the table. because Cannock has entered into a production agreement with ESPN without